What's the best way to learn French in my 40s? Hi, my name's Chris. I'm a French teacher at OuiCommunicate, and I specialise in teaching French to speakers of English, over 40s, adult learners. And in this video, I'd like to talk about the best ways to learn a foreign language in our 40s, and we'll look at different possibilities, different scenarios, and try to work out which is the best. So let's start with the obstacles first. As a 40-something wanting to learn French, you're likely facing a typical set of obstacles, including, limited time, limited energy, and limited budget. Unless you've found a way around this, these are the typical obstacles. On top of this, there are the psychological elements such as self-doubt, an apprehension towards unfamiliar circumstances, which are well understandable. For example, are you still capable? Does your brain still function in this way? You realize probably that there's no way of knowing unless you actually try. At this early stage, you might already have started to use Duolingo, of all things, which probably had the effect of making matters worse. I wish I'd never started, sort of thing. Then we have the internet, which contains, of course, as many opinions as there are people. Some say to live abroad in full immersion, others say to find a language partner or watch films in a foreign language. You feel a bit lost probably, and all you want to do is learn the French. So let's talk about the solutions then. Option one, you could go to a local language school and take a French course. Of course you could. Language schools broadly fall into two categories, as I understand them. Those that entertain, and those that sell official French certificates. With the first option, with the language schools that entertain, you wouldn't be embarking on a very strategic plan of action and will likely leave the evening class wondering what exactly you accomplished. And I've seen this many times because I used to work in one of these schools, more than one actually, and it's typically what happens. They're very entertaining, you leave the class, but you're not quite sure what you accomplished. Now, these types of schools sell you their time as opposed to their skill. And to me, this is a very important distinction. Yes, there is skill included in the time, but mainly they're selling you their time. And the class is typically filled with a variety of activities to please the majority of the learners. It's a fun moment which usually carries a very uncertain outcome in terms of the learning. The schools that sell certificates, the other type of school, are usually more costly and have similar disadvantages. Despite appearances, they too sell time. They do sell skill, but usually they sell time. You buy 60 minutes of French, 120 minutes of French, and their teachers are also usually contractors, not all of them, but they're usually contractors and follow guidelines and a set program. Also, from a student's perspective, meaning yourself, there'll be a suspension of disbelief, which is necessary to accept the idea that A2, B1, B1, B2, C1, C2 finds application in real life, which it unfortunately doesn't really. But I do understand why you would want to do a diploma in French, have a little certificate, because it helps with immigration and other reasons besides. I'm just personally not in favour of it because these certificates are very imperfect. Overall, classes in a language school are more expensive due to the overheads. Obviously, that's one thing to know. There's also the real risk of time wasting, which I personally don't like at all due to the commute, but also for the need to study outside of the class, unless they somehow manage to make you learn during the class, which is all but guaranteed. For meaningful results, you'd have to commit to 2 nights at a minimum, plus the commute. So I would say that the option of language schools, the pros are they're fun. They're a good moment in common with people. They're fun. The cons, they're slow and they're expensive. That's how I feel about language schools. Option number 2, you could start to watch films in French, follow a podcast, or chat with a language partner. These popular options, to me, as far as I'm concerned, fit in the same category due to their very unclear benefits. Yes, you are doing French, technically, but no, you don't quite know what it's all leading to. And one problem will be to turn these activities into a meaningful skill. And the second problem will be the absence of any reference, map, or measuring stick. A more strategic learning of French requires the learner to see language as a structured system. Films tend to throw quantities of words at you in different speech registers, and it would take hours of exposure, hours, weeks, months, years even of exposure to turn any point of grammar into a tool that you can rationalize and use. Because don't forget, they're throwing quantities of words at you, but the object of the game is to take this information and transform it into a tool that you can use. Also, if you're not trained in the science of language, linguistics I mean, or some form of language teaching, if you don't have that technical understanding, I think you run the risk of not understanding what you're seeing or hearing in the case of a film. In other words, how do you make sense of it all? And you could compare this to anything, to sports. You could sit down and watch a tennis match or a football match, but how do you transform what you're seeing into an active skill? How do you understand what they're doing on a technical level? I feel that podcasts present the same problem as films. The host of the podcast needs to create content, thus repeating formulas already used. And the more they speak, the more they create volume, and the less they can be used as a strategic tool for learning. And a further problem is that the native speaker format, which I find to be a problem. For example, they won't necessarily see clearly into the priorities of the language they speak as native speakers, and they might insist on teaching words that have marginal use, and typically they'll say, oh, by the way, did you know that this is an expression in French, and it's really cool if you use it too. Yes, but how many times a year are you going to use it? And thirdly, we have conversation partners, which I wouldn't dismiss entirely because it would be unreasonable. They are useful to overcome a certain fear of speaking, of course, but I feel that they similarly present the problem of turning the activity into a practical tool. What I mean, for example, is, well, how do you know which skills are missing from your arsenal by speaking with someone? How to trust the corrections of your partner? How to know if you're moving forward or if you're treading water? Because speaking for the sake of speaking doesn't usually bring you to a satisfactory level of French unless your partner is a qualified teacher of French, of course. So I feel that this second option, the pros are, well, they're engaging and fun, all these three activities I mentioned. They're engaging, they're fun, watching films, podcasts and conversation partners. Well, the cons are they lack a definite strategy. Option 3, you could use an app or an online program. Apps and online programs are cheap and can be carried around with you in your pocket. They can be fun and provide snippets of French which a beginner can digest more easily. And they also offer the advantage of not being damaging to the ego because they're not very challenging. I think it's an important point, they're not damaging to your ego. As I see it, apps tend to gain public traction for reasons unknown. It's a very mysterious field for me. Some of these will follow the teachings of 1970s language gurus, while others promise they've just revolutionized language learning for an effortless experience. I feel that the main danger with apps and online programs is not knowing who built them, nor following which logic. The common downfall of apps, as I see it, and similar online programs, is that they underestimate the human psyche, the frame of mind of the learner, and they promise easy steps without taking into account the frame of mind of the user. And they simplistically imply very often, do this and this will happen, which of course is very rarely the case. In terms of the success of their teachings, very few living proofs have come forward and said, I finished their program and now I speak French. Many have started and jumped ship and gone from one app to another, and I've actually met more learners who tried 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 apps. There's a whole row of the top of the mountain, sort of the most visible set of apps. There's 6 of them. There's There's Bazoo, there's Paul Noble, there's Duolingo, obviously. There's 5 or 6 of them, which everyone knows. Lingoda, everyone knows, and a lot of learners that I've met actually tried them all and sort of jumped from one to another. So, and this says something to me. No one that I have ever met said, hello Chris, I'd like to perfect my French. I've only ever used this app. I'm really good at French now. I'd just like to fine tune it with you. That's never happened, never, for whatever reason. There could be more than one reason, but that's just what I found. Now these apps, as I see it, I don't know everything about apps, but usually impose a predetermined route or offer freedom of navigation for the student/user. Whichever way is best between the two can be hard to determine, as each come with their respective shortcomings. A level-based app, typically Duolingo, a level-based app opens up questions about the logic of the structure. Why did they make this decision and not another decision? A free roaming app, in which you have complete freedom to discover what you want on the app, also implies that the student/user knows exactly where they should be going. And unless you're a seasoned language learner and you know what you're looking for, chances are it might not always work very well. And I'm being cautious here with what I'm saying. The builders of these apps usually range from uninspired to overly inspired, and some will claim to have discovered secrets to language learning unknown to academia even, and others propose basic flashcards to memorize vocabulary, nothing that a pen and paper can't achieve. My score for apps, well, the pros is that they're easy to access, and of course the price, they're very cheap, they're easy access and price. And the cons, well, the results and the credentials of the builders of these apps. Option number 4, going to a foreign country and hoping that French happens, or picking up French abroad, to say it nicely. A popular option among many future residents of Europe is to buy the property first and worry about language later, and why not? I'm absolutely not judging. The plan here is that one will be obliged to sink or swim because obviously you're abroad, thus forcing French to happen in a natural way. But under closer inspection, and it's just my opinion and I'm by no means judging anyone, this plan I feel is the furthest thing away from strategic planning. Yes, you will be surrounded by speakers of French or other countries. No, they will not give you a minute of their time to speak with you. And even if you did engage in meaningful 30-minute conversations every day in a sustained way, the native speaker wouldn't be correcting or advising you. First of all, they might not be able to, and their corrections might, or their guidance might not be strategic, for the simple reason that they might know the right answer, obviously because they're native speakers, but they wouldn't know what's important, they wouldn't know the structure of the language. On a strictly mathematical level, the odds are very low to encounter willing native speakers of that new host country who would serve as your new teacher. When would this happen? Where and why would it happen? Yes, you would be surrounded by foreign media, television, radio and so forth as a source of learning, but this also brings us back to the problem of using podcasts. It would be the same problem as I already mentioned about podcasts, only that this time it's happening in a new country. At the very top of the list of problems, and this is a serious one, there is the risk of learning badly, and that's a very, very real thing. The locals, wherever you live, France, anywhere else, Switzerland, Luxembourg, will forgive you your uncertain French. They absolutely will, and they will rather focus on your message rather than the quality of your French. And even if you say me eat, they'll understand that you're hungry, right? The equivalent of me eat. Because communication works, right? You don't have to speak beautifully to be able to communicate. And as many others before you, you risk, and I think it's not even a risk, you will absolutely drag on errors for years that no one will ever address, and your overall register in French or in another foreign language will be a mix of formal and informal, which can be problematic in many situations. And I've met many people like that, and I'm sure everyone's met at least one person like that who's been living in a foreign country for a very long time, and they speak very uncertain English, very uncertain French. Yes, you can understand them, but also it closes many opportunities. Professional, social, you name it. So it's, sink or swim will work to an extent, but I think it usually leads to very bad learning. So my evaluation of that, well, the pros are maybe a sense of motivation because you're abroad, so you're highly motivated. You do have access to natives, yes, if you live abroad. The cons, well, learning badly and a feeling of isolation very often, because especially if you can't speak very well, you might feel isolated. Which brings us to option number 5, dedicating several months to the proper study of a foreign language. Fancy that, how quaint. What a funny idea this is. Studying and learning in a regimented way in view of a clear outcome. Fancy that. Whether it's with the aid of textbooks, learning platforms or a teacher, I think that the 2 main points to consider are organisation and time effectiveness. It has to be well organised, and you don't want to be wasting too much time. You can plan and assemble the learning material yourself. You can do it all alone. It's possible, but I think it takes a linguistic frame of mind in order to see the priorities within that language. And I'll compare it to owning a business, running a business for the first time. Just as the first-time business owner will find it hard to foresee the pitfalls of running a business, so will first-time language learners fail to distinguish the priorities from what's accessory. And this type of thing is often seen in the exclamation, I need more vocabulary. People often say, without rationalizing that every French word technically falls under that blanket description. And this shows to me that certain learners don't see clearly in what they need to accomplish, because it takes that linguistic frame of mind, it takes that experience. And a better formulation, instead of saying I need more vocabulary, would, for example, be to say I need more prepositions, but I don't quite know which ones are actually used in everyday French, or even which ones I need, which a seasoned language teacher can happily answer, thus saving you time and wasted effort. Once you develop experience learning a language, either by yourself or with the help of a teacher, you come to understand that languages are systems that you can divide into little boxes. And once it's understood which words, so to speak, go into which boxes, you can start to understand how many boxes you've already opened and how many boxes still remain closed before you can claim to know the foreign language of your choice. And it's all about perspective. I'm comparing a language to a set of boxes, but you can imagine a language as or even drawers that you open and close, sock drawers. You can compare it to boxes. Like, imagine a pyramid of skills, a pyramid of boxes. In each of these boxes there's a skill. Well, you have to move the pile from here to there, and when there are no more boxes to move, then you can claim you know the language. But I think it takes a certain linguistic frame of mind to see a language in those terms, to see a language as a structured entity, call it. In support of this 5th option, we can compare language learning to other fields of life such as sports coaching and ask ourselves how many ranked players became competent by using an app, exposing themselves to sports by means of films, or randomly engaging in unstructured games, as is done with conversation partners. Yes, you can kick the ball in the goal. No, you do it rather badly, and by the way, your technique is awful. And it's exactly the same with language learning. If we look at sports coaches, what they do is targeted, precise repetition of motion, and it's very well organized, and they do drills, and there's no reason this shouldn't be applied to language learning. Absolutely not. So the pros to option number 5, as I see it, well, the pros are the results. You're moving towards a certain result. And the cons are, well, it requires effort. Obviously, it requires effort. And I think that what options 1 to 4 had in common is that they required no effort. They were quite easy, they were quite accessible, but they also didn't guarantee many results. So option number 5, yes, they do offer results, but at the cost of efforts. I'd like to conclude on this video after these 5 options by mentioning that language learning can meet a very, very, very wide range of definitions according to your personal ambition and your end goal. To an extent, learning a French song on the banjo also means I'm learning French. It really depends how you want to define it. As a learner in your 40s, as we established, you'll have to decide on your end goal, what your circumstances are, consider the weekly hours you can dedicate to learning, and come up with a viable strategy. And it's the very word strategy that should be on top of your considerations, with quality as a close second. Language schools are a very good option, but Are they strategic according to your goals? That's the real question. How many back and forths to evening classes will it take before you can claim to know French? Conversations with language partners do serve a purpose, no doubt about that, but they come under similar scrutiny, as do podcasts and watching films. What exactly do they lead to, and are they strategic? I personally believe that the best and most strategic way of learning a foreign language is by rationalizing and compartmentalizing. Each little box of knowledge contains a certain French skill that requires to be mastered, and once you've opened all the boxes, well, you'll have the assurance that you've covered all the important skills in French. There's a starting line and there's a finishing line. I hope it was useful. My name is Chris. Thanks very much for watching. See you soon.